A once promising season now feels very perilous after the Seahawks came up just short against the Cowboys on Thursday. Having now lost 3 in a row and 4 of their last 5, Seattle finds themselves reeling at 6-6. Seahawks beat reporter Gregg Bell joins us to discuss what's wrong, whether it can be fixed, and preview Sunday's rematch with the 49ers. Let's light them up. I'm Jackson Bevins, and this is Cigar Thoughts. Welcome back to the Cigar Lounge. I am Jackson Bevins, and along with my stupendous producer, Mike Barwin, this is the Cigar Thoughts podcast. Mike is a bit under the weather and doesn't have much of a voice, but rest assured, he's powering through and making the magic happen on the boards like he always does. He's like a guardian angel for this show, but it does nearly guarantee there won't be a Travis Homer reference in the episode, for better or worse. Look, it's been a tough go for the Seahawks lately, and I'm looking forward to talking with today's guest about what's going wrong and what can potentially be done to fix it. But first, if you're listening or watching us right now, it's hopefully because you like the show. And if you like the show, there are a few ways you can support it. If you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, take a couple of seconds to leave us a 5-star rating. And if you're feeling super supportive, a quick review as well. You can do that right now. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you'll find full video episodes, entertaining clips, and the audio reads of every Cigar Thoughts article after each game this season. This is probably the best way to help the show grow, and growth is going to enable us to bring more of our football discourse your way, so we're grateful for the few seconds it takes to like and subscribe. We're also thrilled to announce an awesome new partnership with Westland Distillery in Seattle, which is my favorite local whiskey maker. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll see me enjoying a glass of their Outpost Range Solum, which has a delightful bite to it that really makes the flavor pop. Westland is an American single malt whiskey distillery in the Soto neighborhood of Seattle. The tasting room and bar is open to the public, serving whiskey flights, cocktails, and small bites. The bottle shop is on site, featuring distillery exclusive releases and more. They're located at 2931 First Avenue, a little over a mile south of Lumen Field. Needless to say, I'm stoked to be working with them, and one of the reasons I love their whiskeys so much is that they're excellent pairings with a good cigar. And speaking of, we do, of course, have our own special release of cigars that you can purchase at a terrific price as a listener of the show. In fact, I'm smoking one of them right now. As many of you know, we partnered with one of the most prestigious cigar manufacturers in the world to release these official Cigar Thoughts cigars, which you can order directly from cigarthoughtsnfl.com. Just follow the link to get these easy-to-smoke stogies rolled with 13-year aged premium Dominican tobacco leaf, or hit us up on Twitter or Instagram, and we'll send you the details directly. As we've mentioned before, a box of 10 stogies with this particular blend would normally go for between $350 to $400, but our partnership allows you to get your own bundle of 10 for just $169, which is less than half of MSRP. And the cigars, they come with a Bovita humidification pack and a Mylar storage bag to make sure they stay fresh, whether you have a humidor or not. All right, we got some stuff we got to dig through today, because the season that has until recently been quite fun, all of a sudden feels very bleak. The Seahawks won 5 of their first 7 games, but have lost 4 of the last 5, 2 of which have been absolute beatdowns. And it doesn't get any easier as the team prepares to head to San Francisco to face a 49ers team that is obliterating entire franchises like the freaking Death Star. The good news, we're joined by a man who is very close to the action. He is the hardworking Seahawks beat reporter for the News Tribune and 2-time recipient of the Washington State Sports Writer of the Year award, as voted on by the National Sports Media Association, including this past year. He is Gregg Bell. Gregg, thanks for making the time on a short week.
As always, Jackson, thank you. That's very, very heady intro of you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
It's all true, man. It's all true. You know, we had you on last year and really enjoyed it, and we've been thrilled to get you back. It means a lot that you've made the time. And look, I want to take a few minutes and talk about that game against the Cowboys. But then I also want to zoom out and focus on some overarching themes with this team. But first of all, what were your expectations going into that Thursday night game? And were you surprised that it was competitive as it was?
I wasn't shocked, because we've seen Pete Carroll's Seahawks almost inexplicably bounce back sometimes. Mm-hmm. I remember the Detroit game last year, even the Detroit game in week 2 this year. You would have thought they would have gotten boat raced, and they didn't. So it wasn't a complete shock. when they are balanced with the run game, and it allows them to open up the pass and the play action. And when Smith is not just sitting back in a pocket as a liability behind that offensive line, they do score with anybody. Well, anybody not in San Francisco.
Yeah.
But when they don't do any of that, they lose to almost anybody. And that's offensively really their issue. Can they be balanced enough where teams have to be honest defending them, where pass rushers don't just tee off on Geno? It was really the same when Russell Wilson the last 4 or 5 years of him being here. So because Dallas had to honor the run early, and that first drive for Seattle, I mean, it really set a tone that they weren't going to have to chase the game, but that Dallas was going to, they were in a game defensively and wouldn't be able to tee off on Smith. And then it's okay, this is going to be a game. As the defense let them down at the end, but kept them in the game, I thought, for most of it by turning Dallas away in 3 points instead of 7 on 3 different occasions in the red zone. But then when the game's on the line against a team like that on their home field when they're rolling, that's when the defense had to step up and didn't. Yeah. So to answer your question, it didn't shock me. But in the end, some of the issues that this team's had all year ended up catching them in the fourth quarter, and they needed 4 quarters to beat Dallas.
Yeah, it's tough, because for me, I've been really disappointed with what appeared to be a lack of preparation, especially for that Niners game on Thanksgiving. Yeah. And as Pete Carroll said after the game, the 49ers are really established in what they do, and the Seahawks are still trying to figure that out. And that was like, that one kind of hit like a bullet. And then you asked him a great question about his perceived gap between Seattle and San Francisco that he deflected, but it was
deflected is a nice way to put it.
It is. Yeah. He didn't like it. Like it. But identity has always been a big part of Carroll's ethos. And it was a bit disconcerting to hear that and see that obvious lack of that identity this late into the season. That being said, they did come out swinging against a heavily favored Cowboys team, and Dallas had been killing teams at home before that one. So, as you were covering this team and you're there at practice, talking to players and coaches, did you feel a change in how they prepared for that one versus what you witnessed leading up to the last few games?
Well, I felt an urgency, Jackson. I felt that they didn't go with the every game's a championship opportunity mantra last week. They really stressed the fact that this was an opportunity to get back in the division race potentially. And of course they didn't do it. They also benefited by having 7 days. You talked about the lack of preparation for the 49ers game. Carroll has gone back even after the Dallas game and talked about how they didn't do it right, in his words, practices on that 4-day week. Well, that's coaching. And San Francisco did do it right. San Francisco has better players and they were better prepared, but I don't know what kind of excuse you can have for not being prepared on a 4-day week when you know that's what the task is, and that they've done it before.
Yeah.
But it did benefit them to have 7 days. And most of all, Jackson, it benefited Geno Smith. He was affected in San Francisco. His arm was still hurting during the game. He didn't throw at all that day until 50 minutes before kickoff. Yeah. So his pregame routine, they're a very routine play. NFL players, pro athletes, are very routine-oriented guys. And Geno Smith not throwing until 50 minutes before kickoff. He's usually out there an hour and a half, 2 hours in sweats and throwing, and like all quarterbacks. I'm not excusing it, but there were a combination of reasons why they looked unprepared. But the bottom line is they're professionals and they have to be prepared. And in a game with that magnitude of San Francisco, if you're going to try to win a division, there's no excuse for not being prepared. The big picture here, guys, is this. They are staring at 6-8.
Yeah, they are.
It's going to take San Francisco to get locked in their own locker room for them to win in the 49ers. Short of that happening, they're going to be 6-7. And then when the Eagles come out here, they are staring at a really strong likelihood of 6-8. And then they'll have to win the last 3 games at Nashville on Christmas Eve against the 4-win Titans team, the Steelers at home on New Year's Eve, and then at Arizona to get to 9-8, which may get them in the wild card, the last 7th. And then they go to Philadelphia, Detroit, or San Francisco and get absolutely yacht raced in the first round of the playoffs. So in the aggregate, they're no better than they were last year. And that's after completely making their defensive front and using a 5-pick on a nickel back and giving your quarterback an extension, all to beat San Francisco and win the division, get home playoff games. So in the big picture, these losses, especially the 2 to the Rams and the losses to San Francisco and Dallas, have put them right back to where they were in January last year.
Well, other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play?
Sorry.
No, here's the thing. I'm with you, and let's talk about it. So I was pretty bummed, of course, after the Cowboys game, not because I had delusions of them going in there and whipping the Cowboys, but they roped you in the way that they played those first three quarters, and they showed like, okay, this team is capable of competing with some of the better teams in the NFL. And it's like, oh, they're 6-6, looking at 6-8, and I kind of stepped back and thought about this team, everything that's happened since they traded Russell Wilson. I'd love to get your thoughts. Feel free to tell me if you think that I'm off base or missing something here. But if you told me that after that trade, after they released Bobby Wagner, when almost the entire NFL media thought that the Seahawks were embarking on a full teardown rebuild, that they were going to go 15-14 over the next 29 games, have a playoff appearance, I would have said, yes, oh my gosh, sign me up for that. Absolutely. I think what happened is because they made the playoffs last year when no one was expecting it, and because they started out 5-2, I got duped into thinking, okay, this team is ready to make the leap now, a year ahead of schedule. Because after that trade, Mike and I talked a lot about, okay, 2023 is going to be about rebuilding a new image for this team with new players, a reset with the age, and then 2024 and on is when you can reasonably kind of start to judge them based on, are they competing, for playoff wins. I still think, use the term on aggregate. I think on aggregate, the Seahawks are still ahead of schedule from where they were, but I bought the siren song that they were ready already, and I think it's becoming clear that they're not.
Well, not only you, they did. Mm-hmm. The Leonard Williams trade told you, the second round pick plus a fifth round told you that they thought this year that they could go to the Super Bowl. You don't make that trade for two picks, including your second rounder, if you don't think you're close. Mm-hmm. And that trade said that they thought they were close. And of course, that trade happened. I think they were 6-3 or maybe 6. No, it was the end of October.
Yeah, it was right before the Ravens game.
So they haven't won a game since they made that trade. And that, had they been 500, I don't know that they trade a second round pick in late October for a 30-plus or a 30-ish-year-old defensive tackle. So I'm with you. I agree with you that the whole picture of being in the playoffs last year and at least being in contention for playoffs, although the immediate future looks bleak here, is a win for them. And getting the picks that they got, and Devin Witherspoon being the 5th overall pick that they never would have had they not traded Russell Wilson, is absolutely a win for them. Witherspoon, I think, should, whatever Jalen Carter attention he's getting, Witherspoon should be the defensive player of the year, the rookie defensive player of the year.
Totally agree.
As the impact that he has from that position, it's so intricate and tricky. And you don't see many nickelbacks in the backfield as much as Witherspoon is. But so they gain for sure. But in doing so, Jackson, they committed to Geno Smith for the future. Mm-hmm. Now, they could get out of that contract after this year. I'm sure you've talked about it on this podcast. It's not exorbitant if they got out of it after 1 year. But they did invest, at least their thoughts, in that they didn't pick a quarterback at 5, thinking they had their guy for the next few years. Well, do they? They can't really answer that question.
So let's stay with this for a sec. Do you think that if one of Young, Stroud, or Richardson had made it to 5, that they would have taken a QB there?
I think Richardson was absolutely on their radar. I think he was very impressive to Carroll, and especially Snyder and Shane Waldron, and how they would use him in the offense. And it was really intriguing to me if Richardson had gotten there. And I'm not, to answer your question, yes, I think they would have taken Richardson. But at that time, they had already re-signed Geno Smith.
Yes, they had.
And it seemed like they had made their mind up that the quarterback wasn't going to be this year, that perhaps it's next year or the year after. But the Richardson situation, sure, that would have been an interesting thing at 5.
Yeah, totally. And here's the thing, we're going to circle back to the QB situation because I want to get your thoughts specifically on it, because I've really enjoyed your observations regarding the quarterback situation over the last couple of years since the Russell Wilson trade. But there were a couple of things in that game on Thursday that I do think were encouraging. And one of them was, Mike and I were actually talking about this before the show, where, Geno's obviously taken a lot of heat this year, and my thought has been he's essentially the same quarterback that was good last year I don't think you can overstate the impact that Abe Lucas's absence has had on this team. I mean, shit, they've played 6 quarters with him this year and scored 51 points, against 2 good defenses in the Rams and the Cowboys. But Geno is just under siege against those good defenses, all September and October, and really struggled. Now, I've been saying, he's still the same guy. But then you heard him say before the Cowboys game, I need to get rid of the ball quicker. And he did. I mean, he was ripping that thing all night. And it was like, okay, there was a difference. He was more hesitant. And whether that's because he had been dealing with so much defensive pressure basically all season or not, it was really nice to see him get back to just seeing a window and letting it fly. And then the other end of that, DK Metcalf, who has been very mercurial in his actual production this year.
It's a good word for it.
Yeah, he validated all that trust. I mean, that first touchdown was a tight window throw, and DK got his hands out away from his body. He timed his steps so that, a lot of times the art, just like playing outfield in baseball, the art of catching a football isn't just the hands. It's where's your foot stride when the ball gets there so that you're not bouncing. And I think DK's really struggled with that. He caught that in perfect stride. He had that amazing over the shoulder catch. He had the 2 other touchdowns in short range where Geno has really struggled in passing for touchdowns in the red zone. And so that to me says, okay, when they're playing with that kind of rhythm, this team really can score points because they haven't been doing that. And to your earlier point about running the football, it's not like they ran super effectively. I think they were like 3.2 yards per carry, but they were effective enough that they were able to stick with it. And they didn't have to just get rid of it. And all of a sudden you look up and they've got 42 passes versus 11 runs. So I think on offense, there were some things that are really encouraging moving forward. And I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that Abe Lucas was back.
Abe Lucas helped them. It also, I thought, helped that Jason Peters was next to Abe Lucas, although Anthony Bradford started, then got injured. Mm-hmm. Peters with Lucas was a better blocking, especially pass blocking, right side of the offensive line. I was writing an ode, Jackson, to Shane Waldron in the game story. I write a running game story as the game happens and post it as soon as the game ends at thenewstribune.com, and then go downstairs and write through it and add quotes. Yeah, I was writing an ode to Shane Waldron for 3 quarters. I thought he finally did what he said he needed to do, and Pete Carroll told him he needed to do: get the ball out of Geno Smith's hands with quick throws, quick routes. Opposite of San Francisco, when they went, their game plan against San Francisco was deep throws because they thought either they could get Ward and the safeties on long passes, or San Francisco had 7 pass interference penalties in their first 10 games and thought they could get basically completions via penalty. And that would absolutely backfire because they forgot that San Francisco's defensive front mauls the Seahawks every time they play.
They sure do.
And that's why he got 6 sacks. Against Dallas, it was the opposite. They were worried about the pass rush, so they got the ball out quickly. They gave the ball to their lead running back 19 times. Charbonneau had 19 carries. He had 3 carries in the first half of the game against San Francisco. I know that they didn't get first down, but they had 19 scrimmage plays, and only 3 of them were run by the running back.
Yeah.
So there was a commitment to the run. You're right, it wasn't productive, but it did slow Parsons and the edge rushers down. When you don't have to worry about the run, you just pin your ears back, as the saying goes, and run straight up the field. And that's what Parsons is an all-pro for. That's what Nick Bosa wants to do. Eric Armstead doesn't want to read whether it's a run or pass and have to go into his assigned gap and hold up. And he wants to go get the quarterback and get paid. And Seattle has been playing into every edge rusher's wet dream all season until the first half of the Dallas game, when they finally made Dallas play the run, and that slowed down the pass rush. Waldron got Geno Smith out more on the outside and on some bootlegs, some shallow crossers from even DK Metcalf had shallow routes. Hugh Mellon, who I do a roundtable with on KJR every week, he cited a stat before the Dallas game that said that, and I don't know where exactly he got it, he said that DK Metcalf had just 1 completion on a quick out route of less than 6 yards all season into that game.
Holy smokes. That's malpractice.
It is. With an offensive line that can't block the fiercest pass rushes. Well, against Dallas, even DK Metcalf had a quick out for a first down in the third quarter. So the point was that Waldron changed. He had to, he did. Now, we could talk about the last play and some of the other things at the end game that he didn't do. And that's why.
Let's talk about that.
Let's talk about leaving number 11 unblocked.
Oh my god. Okay, yeah. That was atrocious, man. That cannot be. You have to have one play for that situation in your bag that you just are keeping for your highest leverage play. That cannot be the best one you've got left.
Jackson, I had the same reaction during the play. This is no lie, no hyperbole. As I saw it happen, and as I saw Parsons unblocked from the press box, I had the same visceral reaction that I did when Malcolm Butler was stepping in front of Ricardo Lockett. I did. The inexplicable.
I believe you.
The inexplicable nature of what I was watching was very similar. It wasn't quite as bad with as big as stakes, but leave anybody else in the state of Texas unblocked than that guy. He's the premier edge rusher. Young, fast, seeks the quarterback, usually needs double teams and a chip. So after the game, I don't know if you were listening to the press conference with Geno Smith.
Yeah, I was.
I prefaced the question with, well, obviously the plan for that play wasn't to leave Parsons unblocked. I don't know if you heard
I thought of you while I was watching it too.
And I said, obviously, that wasn't the plan, Geno. So what was supposed to happen on that play? And he said, well, actually, that's exactly what we did.
Yeah. So
my jaw just dropped.
I know it because I wrote, it's the same thing for you. I'm taking notes through the game, and then I'm filling in the gaps for the article afterwards. And I hadn't heard that yet when I got to that part of the narrative. And so I blamed DJ Dallas for whiffing on the block. Not blamed him because I thought that was an impossible ask. Because it's one thing to have a running back try and pick up an unblocked Micah Parsons, who might be the least blockable guy on this entire planet. But they also, in my view of it, were asking your third string running back to come all the way across the formation to do it.
That's the point.
He wasn't even being asked to do that.
That's the point, is that where he was on the left hash.
He had to go further than Micah Parsons did.
Exactly. They were asking him to cross Micah Parsons' face to get in the right flat.
Unbelievable.
And of course he got caught up in the wash and didn't get out. Is there any doubt he was? Were they expecting him to beat an unblocked Parsons to that spot? Well, of course he was behind him.
How about having a second option available? I mean, this is a one option pass play with maybe your season on the line. So let's stick with this here.
Double slants, double outs, double anything.
Something, man, something. And same thing. I mean, you brought up the play that shall not be named, and same thing. Like, give yourself more than one option, man. You just season on the line. You can't lock in to a one read pass play. Anyway, so sticking with kind of that theme, because I'm with you. I was talking about Shane Waldron was cooking. He's reaching into parts of his bag that he hasn't touched in a month. I was like, here we go.
Right.
Do you think, Pete Carroll, who I think has been blamed, sometimes rightfully, sometimes wrongfully, for meddling when things aren't going well during a season, and meddling, maybe not the best word. I think it kind of is. But he said he was going to step in on third down play calls because Seattle has been atrocious at third down all season. And then they were great. They were converted 7 of their first 8 third downs. Right. They finished 9 of 14 against a very good defense.
Yeah, it was 9 of 11 until the end of the game. Had they converted any of them, they could have won.
You're exactly right. And then, of course, the fourth down play calls were absolute butt. My question to you is, do you feel like Shane Waldron felt heat after? Because Pete Carroll goes to the media last with criticisms. It's one of the things I appreciate about him. If he's hinting at any displeasure with a player or a coach to the media, it's because they have felt it in private for more than just that 1 week. Shane Waldron feels some heat under his butt going into that game?
Absolutely. And you're right. You've been around Carroll enough to read between the lines. Those of us who hear him every day read between the lines all the time. We have to, because he never tells us exactly what's going on. But in Carroll speak, that was Shane Waldron, get off your ass. That's really what that was. And I tried to press him on. I said, "No, wait a minute. How are you going to get involved more on third down?" He goes, "No. I'm not saying I'm going to get involved more. I'm going to say I'm staying involved." And he tried to backtrack.
Yeah.
By the way, he now needs to get involved more in fourth down calls too. But
apparently,
yes, your point is absolutely spot on. He rarely talks about things that precise. We need to get the ball out quicker. We need to help him more. Before that game, after the Baltimore game, after San Francisco, we need to help Geno more. We need to help Geno. This time it was the ball needs to leave his hands. We can't take those sacks. Well, that's not always Geno Smith's fault. Right. Most times, in fact, the play call determines how long he holds the ball. And even if it's a quick play call, if a receiver's covered, then you throw it away or you take off running. When you see a quarterback in a 5-step drop, even at a shotgun, and sitting in the pocket, that means his routes need that time to go down the field to develop. That means the play call is saying you need to have a longer developing play and the ball in your hands. So when fans are screaming at Geno Smith to throw the ball in the San Francisco game, he was being told, and the play was designed. He didn't have anyone to throw to a lot of times, Jackson. When I was watching the binoculars, his receivers still had their backs to him when he was getting sacked, which tells you that the play design was flawed for how the defensive front was playing. So, yes, to answer your question, Waldron was on high alert last week. I'm not convinced Waldron's coming back. We're going to figure that out, and Carroll will figure that out as well. And Carroll wants to let everyone to know that he is no more involved in the third down play calls or the offense than he normally is. He was more involved in that week leading up to Dallas than he was the week before.
Yeah, he sure was. So with that in mind, let's zoom out a bit here. The chances of winning the NFC West are gone. Seahawks are currently the number 8 seed.
What do you mean they're gone? They're 3 games behind with a tiebreaker. There's still 5 games to play. What do you mean they're gone?
I don't know that the 49ers are going to lose 3 more games in the next season and a half, man.
Exactly. The next decade.
But the Seahawks are either the 8 or the 9 seed right now. I'll be honest, I haven't checked if Green Bay is technically ahead of them on tiebreak after that win last night. But they're out of the playoffs if they were to start today, meaning they'll likely not only need to play better down the stretch, that part's obvious, but they'll have to get some help along the way, especially losing the tiebreaker to the Rams, who now have the same record as them. Seahawks have been outscored by 56 points over the last 5 games, and that makes it easy to forget that less than a month ago, this team was 5-2. They had a plus 30-point differential. I want to dive into some specifics with you, but first, do you think the true quality of this team, now that we've got 3 months of sample size to go with, the true quality of this team, as currently constructed, does it more closely resemble what we saw during the first 2 months of the season or what we've seen over the last month?
I think it's more toward what we've seen the last month.
I do too.
But here's the deal. The 2 losses to the Rams are inexplicable. The Rams roster is nowhere near the quality or the depth or the playmakers that Seattle's is. Especially the defensive secondary at wide receiver. When Kenneth Walker's healthy, the running game. Now, Stafford over Smith, probably, yes. But other than that, the Rams have rebuilt their offensive and, besides Aaron Donald, defensive lines. The Seahawks should not lose to the Rams this year, and they've lost twice. If they win both those games, this is a completely different season.
It almost doesn't matter what happens with this 4-game stretch if they had won those 2, because they'd be 8-4 right now. Worst case scenario, 8-6.
Exactly. And then, yes, then you lose the next 2. You're still 8-6. You win 2 or 3 of the last 3. You're in the playoffs at 10-7 or 11-6. The Rams games, to me, are the opener was malpractice in a preparation standpoint, in a play calling standpoint, in an execution standpoint. That was a CFL, XFL quality performance on an NFL stage. The loss in Los Angeles was almost equally bad for how they should have had 28
Worst
points
loss
when
of
they
the
had
season.
13.
Worst loss of the season.
I think I agree with you there. And the end game and Geno Smith rushing to the line and the comms not work, all that. That was also amateur hour, especially at the end.
Yeah.
The NFL is that way though, right? Every one game either way. I mean, they could have lost the Washington game, but they got a kick at the end. They could have won the Los Angeles game, but they missed a kick at the end. That's how this league is. If woulda, shoulda, coulda. But to answer your question, I think this team, because of the line of scrimmage and inferiority to San Francisco, is more like the last month. And that line of scrimmage play was not getting any better, even in the 5-2 start, to me. Now, their run numbers were good, but I thought even at the time when they were at the top 3 in the league in yards per carry allowed, that teams weren't running against them. The Giants didn't even try. Carolina didn't even try. So Carolina was, at the time, one of the highest rushing rate teams in the league, and Donald, whatever the redhead quarterback from Cincinnati.
Dalton, yeah.
Dalton, thank you. He's been around the league so long I've forgotten. Dalton threw it 50 times that game. So they weren't tested early in the run. As soon as teams started testing them, all hell broke loose. I mean, Arizona ran for 120 without Connor. So they have been exposed on their run defense. The most damning thing about this season is on defense, they spent up to $125 million on new contracts if they played them all out, which they all won't get played out, but up to that. They brought Bobby Wagner back. They remade their defensive front with all but Nwosu gone. They bring back Jaron Reed. They drafted 5 for defense. Having done all of that, they are still not dependable on defense.
Right.
Their best players are in the secondary. And that's why they play so much nickel, and that's why Witherspoon's in nickel. And they've gone 3 safeties at times because their best players are 6 defensive backs, frankly. In the NFL, you can't win from the back to the front because quarterbacks have all day to pick you apart, and teams like Sean McVay will just throw underneath crossing routes against those 6 defensive backs that are playing back. And if you don't get a pass rush on a quarterback, it doesn't matter that your 6 best players are in the secondary because you need at least 1 or 2 best players up there to rush the quarterback. I think Uchenna Nwosu's injury changed the season for them on defense.
Oh my gosh. Because now you got Draymond Jones trying to learn a new position.
Yeah.
You're manufacturing pressure. I mean, you
got Frank Clark off the couch. And yeah, exactly. None of that would have happened if Nwosu doesn't go down. You'd have Nwosu and Mafe. You'd have Mafe single teamed because they have their attention on Nwosu on the other side. Now you're getting Mafe double teamed and chipped, who suddenly have stopped sacking after 7 games in a row of a sack. It has changed the entire pass rush. And the pass rush in the NFL changes your defense. You have one, you win. You don't, you lose. That is a nutshell what defensive football in the NFL is today. And Seattle hasn't consistently stopped the run against teams that really want to run against them. But damningly, they have not gotten close to quarterbacks to throw the ball, and the quarterbacks get it out quick. Dak Prescott was doing it the other night too. So this is a long-winded answer to say the 5-2 was more of a mirage. And that's obviously been proven so. The thing that really I go back to is this team, is it any better than it was in January 13th, 14th in San Francisco in the rain when they lost the wild card game? And I think the answer is no. And having done all that they've done, that's pretty damning.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so let's talk about some particular aspects of this team. And for each one, I'm going to ask you to rank them from 1 to 10 relative to the rest of the league. You ready?
Yeah, I saw that. Let's go.
All right. So we're going to start with offensive play calling. And to me, let's say a 1 is Matt Canada and a 10.
Matt Canada. I'm born and raised outside Pittsburgh.
I know you are. I know.
Matt Canada was so bad. I saw a video of the Penguins games early in the season, Penguins hockey in Washington. Did you see this?
Dude, yeah.
They were on the
They're
steps.
canning Fire Canada at a hockey game.
After the Penguins won, they were parading through the streets and they marched to the Lincoln Memorial. And Penguins fans from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial fired Canada hockey fans. Okay, so that's a good one.
He's your one. He's your one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Mike McDaniel's your 10. Where's Shane Waldron in the Seahawks play calling?
Well, in that context, probably a 4 or 5.
Yeah.
And 5 might be charitable because 5 would say normal. You have Shanahan, you have McVay, and you mentioned Mike McDaniel.
You got Ben Johnson in Detroit.
Correct. And even O'Connell in Minnesota.
Yes.
Who is winning with no matter what quarterback is playing.
LaFleur, I think, is great. You'll notice all of these coaches come from the same tree, by the way.
The tree that Seattle hasn't picked from.
Nope. Well, they tried with Waldron.
Tried with McVay. Yeah, they tried with the McVay tree. They've tried it. I think it just drives me nuts to see 4th and 1 shotgun or shotgun from the 1 yard line.
God, yes. I was screaming. Get under center, man.
Yeah. They should outlaw that. A referee should blow the whistle and throw a flag and say, you can't do that. That is illegal. And before the play even starts. They've done that multiple times. And the San Francisco game was another example of that. It's almost like it's a white flag of what Carroll's philosophy and identity is, and it's the exact opposite. Yeah. There are times in games where they look like they're not coached by Pete Carroll. And some of that's personnel. Some of that's been the injuries on the offensive line. But frankly, they need more, and I'm not saying go sign DJ Fluker right now, but they need DJ Fluker type blockers to play how Pete Carroll wants to play.
Well, that was kind of the impetus behind the Bradford pick, was it not?
Correct. Bradford is a DJ Fluker road grader, means SOB guy.
Yeah.
And yes, now
Bradford was kicking ass in that Browns game before he got hurt.
Yes, he was. And I was impressed by him in the Giants game when he was thrown in without preparation and was actually facing off and pushing with Leonard Williams and getting in his face at the goal line. I think he's their guy of the future. Phil Haynes' contract will end, and he's been injured. And Jason Peters, of course, unless he wants to keep playing at 42, and I'm not sure he'll be in Seattle, they're probably going to have Anthony Bradford be their starter for the next 3 years. And that is more toward what I'm talking about of needing some SOBs that play, just mash people on the offensive line. The bottom line, Jackson, is they're not going to win the NFC West until they get those guys, until they have an offensive line that can control or at least have a standoff with the 49ers. And they need an offensive line that can pass protect against the 49ers. And they need a defensive front that can stop Christian McCaffrey and the off-tackle zone reads and the end-arounds with Deebo Samuel, all of that. They need an edge setter that can hold the edge against Deebo Samuel on 5 sweeps. They don't have that. And as long as they don't have that on either side of the ball, San Francisco is going to keep beating them. If San Francisco keeps beating them, what are they playing for? They're playing for draft position, because even if they make the playoffs, they're out in one round because they're going to get a 6 or 7 seed. We've seen it 6 years in a row now. And if they will not get to the Super Bowl, the history of this team and most of the history in the league says you will not get to the Super Bowl unless you have home playoff games. And the only way to get home playoff games is to win the division. And in this NFC West, the only way to win the division is to beat San Francisco with more physical offensive and defensive lines. And they're not there.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think with the play calling, I had them at a 5. I was also kind of, are they 4? Are they a 6? Because we've seen them click before. And I was looking through it, because I think that for these exercises, a lot of times you hear people just give a flippant answer. Oh, they're 7 out of 10 or whatever. It's like, okay, well, let's define this. Who's the worst? Who's the best?
Right.
Where do you fall in between? And as I was doing this in prep for the show, it was like, okay, there's some really bad play calling out there. Shane Waldron is not there. And like we saw last year, I thought a lot of creativity. I mean, we saw a pre-snap motion. This year I've loved it when you see the 2 tight ends in the backfield. They're doing a bunch of slip screen stuff, but it requires a modicum of pass protection to pull that stuff off. I get all that. I've got Shane Waldron as a 5. I want to move to the next one. Quarterback play, and I was saving this for having you on the show, because I've really, really appreciated your thoughts on the post-Russell Wilson quarterback situation in Seattle. So for the sake of the discussion, a 1 I had is Zach Wilson, a 10 is Patrick Mahomes. Where's Geno Smith been in your opinion?
I think he's been a 6 or 7, Jackson. I think he's been hamstrung this year by the play calling and the offensive line and the lack of a running game. I would submit that a lot of quarterbacks would be 10 interceptions in 11 games playing with the conditions that Smith has had. Yep. And then he gets injured, and that affected him for 2 weeks after that. He's a very accurate passer, as many are in this league when he has time to do it. He throws a very catchable and accurate deep pass when he has time to do it. He just doesn't have a lot of time to do it. I really would. Last year, the running game until Kenneth Walker got hurt in the last quarter of the season was why Geno Smith was a Pro Bowl quarterback.
Dude, Ken Walker is awesome, man. I know it's fashionable to say it doesn't matter, and for some teams, I'm sure running back doesn't matter. Fucking matters in Seattle, man. Yeah. Ken Walker matters to this team.
They need Ken Walker back, and I'm not sure he's going to be back against San Francisco this week, the oblique. Man. And he hasn't stepped on the practice field since he got hurt against the Rams. They need him. Geno Smith needs him back. And last year when he got hurt, Geno Smith numbers went down at the end of the year because of it. I think Geno Smith is better than they thought he was going to be as the every week guy when they traded for him. I don't
Did you think it was going to be locked?
I mean, when they traded Wilson, I did.
Did you think it was going to be locked going into last year?
I did. I did. And Carroll decided that the locker room cachet gave Smith the first chance, and then Smith ran with it. I mean, that's really what it came down to, is that the reason why Smith got the first team reps in mini camps and training camp last year was that he had earned it with the 4 years behind Wilson, and that the locker room loved him. And instead of the locker room saying, wait, why is this new guy that we've never seen before, who led the league in interceptions in Denver a couple years ago, why is he the guy when we got this guy we love? And that's why Smith got the first chance, and then Smith ran with it. And that's why Locke never got a shot. Then it surprised me that Locke came back for 1 year and $4 million, because it was obvious when they gave Smith a new contract that Locke wasn't going to play again. Geno Smith has been better than when they traded Russell Wilson. There's no reason to believe Smith was going to throw for 4,200 yards, 30 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, to be a Pro Bowl quarterback. None. There's nothing to say in his career that he was going to do that. This year, I think you call me an apologist, a Geno Smith apologist. People think, by the way, that I'm a Drew Lock lover and a Geno Smith hater.
Speak to it, man, because I've heard people say both things about you. Tell us where you're at.
I am a Geno Smith apologist for this season. I think he's a better quarterback than he's been allowed to be. I think that the play calling, as I mentioned, the offensive line, and the lack of a running game has caused the turnover. Now, he's made some horrid decisions. Most of the time it's been under pressure, either or should have thrown the ball away and didn't, or maybe held the ball a little bit longer than he should have. I think Geno Smith has been better than they expected to. And I don't think when they traded Russell Wilson last spring, 2 springs ago, that they expected to have a $75 million extension for Geno Smith after a Pro Bowl season.
No, I don't think anyone outside of Geno Smith's family saw that as a possibility.
And I don't know that his family did either.
I'm being generous. It's so funny because, leading up to it, that was, on this show and in my articles and on Twitter, all that stuff, that was the dominating conversation. Geno Smith for Drew Lock. And Mike and I were fond of saying, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. They're going to get through this season. They're going to win their 5 games. Then they're going to draft a guy. And then Geno was, I think, safely a top 10 quarterback in the NFL last year. Statistically, top 6. Yeah. And it was like, well, holy shit. Okay. Maybe we need to recalibrate. And then, it's, and I'm still here. So you say Geno's a 6 or a 7. I think that's totally accurate. I have him as a 7 because I think when it comes to making the throws that get you paid, the throws that help you win, like if you need to convert a 3rd and 11 with the game on the line, he can make those throws. And there's just, frankly, such a dearth of quarterbacks who can actually make that throw at the NFL level. We're talking about 15 or less out of 8 billion people on the planet. Like, we really need to be aware of how rare it is to be a functional quarterback in this league. And the backup quarterback's always the most popular guy in town in like 26 NFL cities every year. But this season, more than any season in my lifetime, have I seen how big the difference between starting quarterbacks and backup quarterbacks are, because you have entire teams whose seasons are just toast because their starting quarterback either isn't good enough or got hurt, right? The Bengals, I thought the Bengals came into the season as the 2nd or 3rd best team in the NFL. They're an afterthought now, right? And so, I think that Geno is probably somewhere between the 10th and 12th best quarterback in the NFL, but there's such a huge gap between the top 6 or 7 guys.
But you would take that, right? When you traded Russell Wilson, after you traded Russell Wilson, you take a top 12 quarterback.
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
exactly.
Absolutely. So I've got him as a 7. Okay, so related to quarterback play, and we've touched on this already. Let's talk about the blocking. Let's say a 1 for me anyway, and if you have different teams, let me know. For me, a 1 in this situation is New York Giants. And we saw that the Seahawks got 11 sacks agawant them. And every
which is still like a third of their season total in one game.
I know. It's amazing. And like, look, you want to get paid as a defensive lineman, go play the Giants. And so I've got them as a 1. And I called the Lions a 10. There's a number of teams that are really good at blocking. The Lions kick your ass up front. I love that about it. Very Dan Campbell in that way. So if you got a different 1 or a 10, let me know. But I think those are decent representations of the ends of the spectrum.
Cleveland,
where do you got Seattle's blocking?
A 3 or 4. they have, in general, they've decided to pay and draft skill position players at the top of the draft, Charles Cross being an exception recently. And they've decided to pay players at the skill positions and on defense. And they've decided to, frankly, just wing it on the offensive line quite a bit.
They've been doing that for a decade.
Right. And it's worked. And by and large, 9 playoff in 11 years, 2 Super Bowls, one of them the only ring the Seahawks have ever gotten. It has worked. They've gotten away with it, and they decided not to pay the offensive line, not to draft. I also shudder to bring this up, but I think of Creed Humphrey and D. Eskridge. And that was a symbolic decision that we are going to go to a wide receiver over a center that they could have had for 5 years.
Not even like a true wide receiver either. Like
no, a scat specialty fly sweeps artist.
They took Kirkland's signature Tavon Austin over the best center in the draft. We're not going to relitigate that. All right.
Sorry.
It's okay. It's okay.
I'm sorry, brother. But
no, you're good.
That choice to me exemplified what their philosophy was. We're not going to draft and use big top. They only had 3 picks that year that they picked Eskridge, and they didn't want to use one of the 3 on a top offensive lineman. They went Stone Forsythe as their offensive line choice that year. Enough said. Yep. So the philosophy, though, you could argue has worked. But why did that philosophy work? Because Russell Wilson in his prime mitigated the offensive line's pitfalls. He made plays when he should have been sacked. I used to sit in the press box and tick off the number of plays that a normal quarterback would have been sacked during a Seahawks Russell Wilson game. And it was, Frank, always double digits, always 10 plays.
That's outrageous.
It's true. And to a certain extent, Geno Smith has done that. There was a play in Dallas the other night that he threw the ball sideways, barely out of the pocket, barely to the line of scrimmage, that he avoided the sack and he avoided intentional grounding. He this year has really suffered by an offensive line that was supposed to be better. The Abe Lucas injury absolutely affected the line. It led to 10 different starting offensive linemen, 8 different combinations in the first 10 games. That lack of continuity, that Evan Brown having to teach everybody, new guys, the line calls, Geno Smith not meshing, that all those subtleties matter when you have 99 for the Rams or Nick Bosa or number 11 unblocked coming at you. That stuff matters.
Sure does.
And that is why their third down numbers have been so bad. So it's come a cropper the last 2 years, their negligence on the offensive line. It was a philosophical choice that Carolyn Snyder made. And for a decade, because of Russell Wilson, they got away with it.
Yeah, no, I agree. So I would say, based on how they played so far this year, I would say a 3. Let me ask you this. If you knew that Charles Cross and Abe Lucas would be healthy for the rest of the season, does that change your rating?
No. It'd be maybe
okay, it does for me. You think the rest? You think? Okay, maybe you think the rest of it is so bad that that doesn't really matter?
What's curious about this, Jackson? It shouldn't be so bad. You got 2 young bookend tackles who proved themselves last year, and then you have Damian Lewis, who's still in his rookie contract. I think Evan Brown has been a big upgrade at center.
Oh, certainly.
The strength on top of the ability to call and flush out the blitzes and the protection calls. Right guard has been an abyss. But 1 out of 5 really bad position, 1 black hole position, means your offensive line should be pretty good. So it is somewhat mystifying why they are constantly giving up sacks and pressures as they are with an offensive line that should be better. It
should be better. And it's so funny. We had Walter Jones on the show before the season, and he was talking about that chain reaction effect. It's like if one guy is getting whipped, it makes it really hard for you to do your job, right? Because you can be the left tackle holding it down, just erasing your dude. But if pressure comes from right guard and the quarterback, you've pushed your guy way out to the left and have cleared the pocket, but pressure's coming from the right side, so the quarterback is bailing. He might bail right into the guy that you blocked right out of the play.
Right. You just described Gabe Jackson's Seahawks career.
Oh, I thought Dwayne Brown was going to murder Gabe Jackson.
He might have. I don't know where Gabe Jackson is right
now. All right. Okay. Switching to the other side of the ball here. Let's talk defensive play calling. All right. And for me, it's so funny. Mike and I talk about this a lot. I thought Brandon Staley was going to come in and change the game. You talk about a whiff, thinking about other teams, right? Defense, hot defensive mind, takes over a team with a ton of offensive talent. He's going to go for fourth down all the time. He's cool. He's all this stuff. That defense is just, and they got talent on that side of the ball. They got talent on that side of the ball. Khalil Mack, Derwin James, on and on. They're terrible. They're ass on defense. So I've got them as my one. And let's call it, look, I could say 49ers are the 10 on all of this shit. Like, you know what I mean? I'm trying not to use them as every example. So let's say,
soberingly, that's the team that's going to beat Seattle and win the West against them. But I hear you. That's right.
Right. But that's the standard also. But, without saying the 49ers on every single thing, let's say, like a Dan Quinn, what Dallas is doing, right? Where do you got the defensive play calling, not the execution, but the play calling with Clint Hurt?
I think it's more of a 6. I don't know that Clint Hurt has hurt the defense. Although I did think that they were going to blitz Jamal Adams more than they have.
I did too.
And I don't know if it's because his knee is still bothering him or the 3 safety. I thought, and it looked like last year before the season started when they were going 3 safeties with DJ Reed, that Adams was the designated blitzer and Reed was going to stay back with Diggs. I thought that's what Jordan Love was going to do with Diggs this year, and it has not happened. They've especially recently played a lot more 2 safety, and when they've been in 3 safeties, he hasn't blitzed nearly as much as I thought he would. Some of that is because Devin Witherspoon has been their blitzer, and they still don't blitz Witherspoon as much as I think they should or would. Frankly, I think they should blitz more, especially when Nwosu went down. And I get it that you think your best players are your defensive secondary and the cover guys, but they've got 2 guys, including Witherspoon now, Witherspoon and Adams, who can be blitz specialists. And we saw in the Dallas game, you might have heard in Twitter since the Dallas game, that Jamal Adams got beat by a tight end for a touchdown in the second half.
Yeah. I think I saw something about that watching the game.
And then you might have seen the fallout since then.
Oh, my goodness. I've been such a Jamal Adams apologist, man. I just can't.
I'm with you. I don't know how you
can't do it anymore. And it wasn't just me, man. Everybody we've had on the show has been like, no, Jamal's that dude. and I'm afraid he just might not be that dude.
Yeah, that is, just step away from the keyboard or your thumbs and put the phone down.
You just got it, man. Yeah, no, I hear you. Yeah, I'm with you. Hurt it's so tough, and actually maybe you can speak to this. So I'm going to answer this and say there are 5 or a 6 as far as defensive play calling goes. I think that, look, one thing that I think a lot of people, myself included, need to be reminded of when judging a defense is it is a game of give and take when you're calling defensive, when you're making defensive play calls. Unless you've got the 49ers defense or the Cowboys defense or the Ravens defense, you really are, Browns probably too, you really do have to rob Peter to pay Paul. If you want
you're going to give up something. That's right.
If you want more pass rush, everyone complains about a team doesn't have enough pass rush. Well, okay. Yeah, if you don't have Myles Garrett or TJ Watt, then you're going to have to pull from coverage in order to generate pressure. If your secondary's getting torched, well, you're going to have to give up a linebacker to give another secondary in there. Like, there is give and take there. The one thing that I've seen Seattle and put this in your back pocket, because I want you to answer this. How much of this defensive scheme is Clint Hurt versus Clint Hurt calling Pete Carroll's defense? Just hang on to that for a sec. But one thing that's been consistent over the last 6 years probably is in an NFL where the best offenses are really good at passing between 10 and 20 yards. It's not about dink and dunk and then go over the top anymore. It was for a long time in the NFL. It really isn't. You need to have a quarterback that can hit those sail routes and hit the crossers. And the way Seattle defends that is asking their linebackers to carry these routes over the middle. I mean, Sam Howell torched this defense because they're asking a 32-year-old linebacker to run with 24-year-old wide receivers and run 50 yards with them on these sail routes, right? That's the one thing that's really tough for me is there no way to get these linebackers out of a position where they have to not only take the first beat of a play to identify run or pass, but then stay with wide receivers in order to do it. I mean, I'm glad they're not dropping defensive ends into coverage the way that they used to under Ken Norton Jr., but man, what a tall order for Jordan Brooks and Bobby Wagner.
Yeah, and you're right. And some of that is because they don't want to take Wagner or Brooks off the field in passing situations and put in even a 6th or 7th defensive back.
But if you have a competent quarterback, you're just eating on that.
Yeah, you are. And they have some of that has been when they blitz Witherspoon and they've taken him out of coverage, and that has put more of an onus on Brooks and Wagner to be in pass coverage. Excuse me. Brooks is surprised them for how well he has played and been able to sustain on that knee 8.5, 9 months. And so they've been loath to take him off the field too. The one game he did, he was pretty upset about, and they didn't put that was the end of that. They decided that he's staying on the field. And so I'm with you on the linebackers and coverage. But to the back pocket issue, if it is absolutely Pete Carroll's defense. Yeah. And part of the reason that Clint Hurtt is the defensive coordinator is because he's a Carroll guy and was his line coach. And he wanted Vic Fangio's schemes without Vic Fangio. He doesn't. Carroll doesn't want Vic Fangio to be the defensive coordinator. He wants Carroll to be the defensive coordinator.
Yeah.
And that's why Clint Hurtt is who he is, and that's why Ken Norton is who he is, and on and on. As long as Pete Carroll is the Seahawks coach, it is Pete Carroll's defense. From how, I mean, he spends practices, especially in training camp, in the defensive back, the cornerback drills, teaching the step kick. And I'm talking Pete Carroll at 72 is in the position group. I don't see any other NFL head coach and college head coach that is in a position drill teaching technique. He is still that involved in the defense. So you better believe the players who play, the schemes they run, how often they blitz, and what their substitution packages are Pete Carroll's.
Man, yeah. So let's go from there to the actual defensive performance. So we're talking about defensive play calling. We think they're middle of the pack, maybe a little bit above. Overall defensive performance, just like last year, October saw great defensive performance. I mean, Seattle had the 4-game win streak last year where they beat everybody by 10 plus points, 4 games in a row. I think they were one of 2 or 3 teams to do that all season. This year, they had a stretch against bad teams, of course, but they dominated those bad teams on defense. And then they face really good offenses and they're toast. So I'll go first. I'm giving their overall defensive performance a 5 because they have generated sacks. They have forced turnovers. They're getting explosive plays on defense in a way that they haven't done since 2016. And that's been really encouraging because I always say you're allowed to be bad. You're allowed to be boring, but you can't be both. And the Seahawks were really boring for a long time, and they weren't good enough to overcome how boring they were on defense. This year, they're at least not boring.
I think that yes, I agree with you. And I think they have a very talented secondary, the Jamal Adams issue notwithstanding. The Cincinnati game was the game that impressed me the most defensively.
Totally agree. Man, absolutely.
The pressure, they took away Bernard in the run game, or Mixon was not, and none of them. They were trying everything. Cincinnati was shallow crossers, quick routes, immediate tackles, Witherspoon blitzing. I thought the Cincinnati game was their triumph of the season. Then the teams got better. The schedule got tougher, and the quarterbacks got better. I know Burrow was just coming off an injury in that Cincinnati game.
But even then, they scored touchdowns on the first 2 drives, and they got 3 points on their last 10 drives.
Right.
I mean, like Burrow, I think completed the first 15 passes of that game. So it's not like Burrow was a shell of himself in that game, and they really bowed up after that. So I'm with you. I think that was their best defensive performance of the season.
They tight covered and got pressure, which is often hard to do on Burrow. And then the better teams since then, they have frankly non-competitive on defense a lot of the time. Yeah. I thought the Dallas game was a really deceiving for a defensive. You see 41 points and you think, well, geez, the defense. There were 5 drives inside the 30-yard line that Seattle turned Dallas away from touchdowns. And 4th down conversions and 2 or 3 failed 4th down conversions. And the defense kept them in the game while the offense finally figured it out. And I mean, they started fast on offense, but that could have been a track meet a lot earlier than it ended up being in the 3rd and 4th quarter. They had a Seattle 2-score lead in that game. So the defense hasn't had a complete game, but they have had flashes in games where they have been really good. I think the most disappointing thing about the defense is the run defense. And Nwosu was known as a pass rusher. That's why he got paid. and co-leader in sacks last year. But his ability to play every down, including to set the edge on the run, and as you mentioned, keep Draymond Jones more inside on the defensive line to help Darren Reed in the middle, that was going to work. And I think if you had to point to one thing that has ruined them defensively, it's number 10 getting hurt this year.
Yep, totally agree. It's a little bit of an indictment that one injury can completely flip this defensive performance on its head, though.
Yes, it is. No, you're exactly right about that.
So where are you rating them? 1 to 10 overall defensive performance?
I'd say a 6. Statistically, I don't know if that matches up with. I think they're in the bottom third in run defense still, and I think they're in the middle of the bottom third in pass defense, and they're top third in sacks because of that one game. But yeah, I'd say a 6. What say you? You said about a 5 or a 6 for Hurt.
Yeah, I think overall defense performance, like I said, I'll put them at a 5 just because we've seen them be really good. And I do think the defense was better than the statistics indicate in that Cowboys game. The other thing to keep in mind, look, I think by now anyone listening to the show knows I'm not just, gonna make excuses for the Seahawks. Man, we all want to have an accurate depiction of the team that we cover or root for. But I think they were better. Dallas's offense is in God mode right now. Dak Prescott's playing the best football on earth right now, and they've got the weapons and all of that stuff. All right, so the reason I've been holding off on the 49ers for an example of a 10 is because I was saving them for this one. Overall talent on the roster. Forget coaching, top to bottom. You're gonna apply a league average coaching staff to all of the rosters in the NFL. Where would you rate the overall talent on the roster? And I went from the Panthers to the 49ers on this one.
I'd say a 7+.
Yeah. I think they're an 8.
Exactly. This is a 10 or 11 win team. Mm-hmm. They happen to be in a division where they're going to get 2 L's from San Francisco, and they shouldn't lose against anybody else. They should be more competitive, obviously, against the Ravens. But I keep going back to they should not lose to the Rams. They have a talent gap that is far superior to Los Angeles.
Those games are the biggest indictment to me of this coaching staff, of anything else that's happened in the season.
That is a preparation and out-coach game. McVay changes in game, and the Seahawks don't have an answer for him. The second half, they were leading the Rams opener, and they get boat race 23-0 in the second half after Sean McVay has 20 minutes to go in and change things.
Unreal, man.
Yeah, can a coach win you games? Well, the coach won 2 games against Seattle.
Absolutely. So, yes. And coaches can definitely lose you games.
And they lost 2 games against Los Angeles. They might not have beaten Baltimore, but they weren't prepared for Baltimore. After the game,
the difference in talent between those 2 rosters, the Ravens have a better roster than the Seahawks. They don't have a 34-3 better roster than the Seahawks.
No, that's exactly right. And after the game, we talked to players who said, well, we didn't expect the Ravens to do this, and we didn't expect the Ravens to do that. Okay, so that happens every game. What are you going to do to answer that? Teams every game break tendencies and don't do what their film has shown up to that point. That's what coaching is. So what do you do in game to change? And nothing changed in the Ravens game. It was the same from start to finish, especially on defense. But what do you do in game? I think the in-game adjustments are what Seattle often lacks against the Shanahans, the McVays, and if they played Miami, how many points Miami might score on them. They need to be able to adjust better in games to give their guys chances to keep pace with what the other team's doing, and I don't think they've done that. When you look at DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, that alone should get you some points every game. You should never have 3 points in a game with those 2 guys. And no matter who the quarterback is, that their offensive and defensive lines subvert them within the division, and that's why they're a wild card team. And then when you have other malfunctions and don't execute, that's why you're going to miss the playoffs. That's really where their team is. They're not a division champion because they're not as physical in the line of scrimmage as San Francisco. So they're a wild card team who's blown games to the Rams and others, and why they're out of the playoffs looking in right now.
Yep, totally with you, man. So let's finish with coaching, and I'll break it up into 2 parts here because I think that we tend to judge coaching based on what happens on Sunday, and I think that's probably only 30 or 40% of it. So I'm going to break it up into 2 things.
Yeah,
coaching when it comes to midweek preparation And then in-game coaching. And you can tell me if you think there are specific teams that represent a 1 and a 10 on these, if any names come to mind. But for me, preparation so far this year has been like a 3. And in-game coaching, I think has been a little bit better. Pete Carroll's been much more aggressive on fourth down. He's been better with timeout preservation. He's been, less hormonal, as he would put it, with his challenges. I do think that he's kept his head in high leverage situations a little bit better. But break it down for me, 1 to 10 in terms of midweek preparation and 1 to 10 in-game coaching.
Well, in Carroll's perspective, I think he's the best between games coach in the league. I'm not talking.
I kind of do too, which is why this year has been so baffling.
Yes, and I'm not talking game plans. I'm talking about taking care of guys, motivating the intangibles that people don't want to hear about. Carroll is all about intangibles.
Yeah,
he is the champion of intangibles, about players first and the music and the guests and letting players be who they want to be and letting players have input on the game plan and about all kinds of stuff that fans you don't see on a Sunday. I think from Monday to Saturday, Carroll might be a 10.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not talking again, game planning. I think that there have been some games that Waldron has been a 2 on game planning going into the game. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned in game, I think that they are woeful as far as adjustments. But as a game, you're talking about Carroll's for game management. I agree with you on the more aggressive fourth downs. That he messed up the Dallas timeout delay a game situation, which shouldn't have mattered. A 42-yard kick or a 37-yard kick shouldn't matter to an NFL kicker, especially in a dome on turf. But all he had to do was call timeout. And it's
the first half. Who gives a shit?
Exactly. And they ended up a few minutes later using a timeout on second down on defense. So that shows you that they don't care about when they use timeouts, which we already knew. So just use a timeout there and you don't have it delay a game. That was just inexplicable to me. But yes, by and large, he has been more aggressive in games. The challenging is still a running joke on our beat when he challenges and how often he
How could it not be?
Yeah. Exactly. But the in-game adjustments, to me, I would rate them way down, like a 3. In terms of, and McVay and Shanahan would be at the top of that list for me.
Of course. They play. Of course. So, all right. So we covered a lot of ground just now, and you've been extremely gracious with your time. So I want to finish. We'll talk about the 49ers game briefly here in a second, but
that's about what it deserves.
Yeah. So
I'm afraid.
So, all right. So just quick recap: offensive play calling, quarterback play, blocking, defensive play calling, defensive performance, and overall talent. Which of these aspects do you think Seattle is best suited to improve upon? And which ones do you think that they're kind of stuck with where they're at?
They have to improve. They cannot be a lot worse over time on the offensive and defensive lines. They really can't. So the greatest opportunity to improve is there. But how do you do that? You got to draft at the top of the draft. You got to draft a center instead of having 1-year rentals. 9 centers in 9 years it's been since they traded Max Unger. You got to invest high draft capital and contracts in those positions. And I don't mean edge rushers. I mean guys who can stop the run inside. Jaron Reed's a start, but he's 30 years old on his 8th season and a 2-year contract. You need to get a guy like a Jalen Carter. Now, I'm not saying they should have taken a Jalen Carter, but somebody who impacts the middle of your defense who may not get sacks, but can keep teams from controlling the game and having 3rd and 2s because they have a running game.
Can Leonard Williams be that guy?
Can he? Yes. I'm not sure with the guys next to him on the defensive line he'll become that. But yes. And now the question is, you're going to have to re-sign him or else he's a 10-game rental. And they're working – you talk about intangibles. Pete Carroll is pulling out all the intangible stops to make Leonard Williams think this place is Disneyland so that he re-signs after this year.
Yeah.
But the biggest delta I see for growth is on the offensive and defensive lines because that's what you got to get to with San Francisco. San Francisco's still here and Seattle's still here on offensive and defensive lines in the trenches. And until that gap lessens, they're not going to win the NFC West. And Jackson, if they're not going to win the NFC West, then they aren't getting any better.
What are we even doing here?
What are we doing? We're selling tickets and having $20 beers. That's what we're doing.
I've been vocal about saying I think it's a blessing that they've had the Rams and the 49ers in their division because you are seeing the standard in front of you, right?
4 times a year.
Totally, man. Like those teams don't fuck up against the NFC South like Seattle did last year, right? The NFC South last year's worst division NFL's had in 10 years. They went 0-4 against those teams.
Right.
Like 49ers ain't doing that shit. The Rams ain't they're not doing it now. They certainly weren't doing it, when they were making their runs through the NFC West a few years ago. So, I mean, the standard is there. You get to see twice a year, 4 times a year, what it looks like to be good enough to win this division. And look, Pete Carroll's won, 5 division titles? He knows what it takes to win. It's not like this is the first time there have been other good teams in this division.
Right.
It seems like the good teams are accelerating whereas Seattle is treading water. And that is tough to see.
They have gained defensively. They got younger and better in the secondary.
They were so bad last year.
Right. They have really gotten better defensively. They just need to stop the run now and build from the inside and the front back. They built so many years the Legion of Boom and on from the back to the front. Between pass rush and stopping the run, they just have to be more fortified in the middle up front. Defensive, but I think their defense has rapidly and vastly improved, and they're still young enough where it's going to get better. So there are definitely the defensive pieces there. They just got to get some maulers in the middle. They need, honestly, they need a 25-year-old Al Woods. That's kind of that type of player in the middle. And they tried to make Jaron Reed on everything. He's actually been really great this year.
He's been awesome.
But he's been asked to do 10 things: nose tackle, a shade, an outside 3 technique, sometimes some 5, pass rush.
Meanwhile, Quentin Jefferson is just wrecking shop in New York right now for $2 million, $3 million.
That's right.
Yeah. I hear you, man. I hear you. You know what? I'm gonna add one more thing. We're gonna skip the Niners preview, man. If the Seahawks surprise us, you and I can revisit it. We don't
Jackson, remember, if the Seahawks win, it's because they padlocked the Santa Clara locker room, a home locker room. They couldn't open the door.
That's right. So, yeah, unless Trent Williams and Deebo Samuel and Brock Purdy and Nick Bosa all get arrested this week, I don't think it's gonna matter. But you know what? I'm gonna ask your opinion 1 to 10 on one other thing. I'll break it up into 2 parts. John Schneider, the job that he's done post Legion of Boom, because I think 2010 through 2012, certainly, I think he's like a 10 plus. I don't think we've seen a better series of roster construction moves than we did when John Schneider first got here. Fast forward, he has to deal with re-upping all of those guys. That puts constraints on the roster. Give him past 2015 through 2017. But in the last 5 years, how do you rate John Schneider?
I think he regressed to the mean. I think that the overall for 13 years is that he is a good general manager. Not exceptional, not terrible. He was exceptional, like you mentioned, the Legion of Boom days. And I think he regressed to the norm. The average drafts over 13 years is about what Seattle has had. The last 2 have been excellent. And he went back to some character guys, some great people guys, like they say, that they gone and went to talk to the custodians in the dorm rooms and teachers and all that kind of stuff that they got away from for a couple of years. Malik McDowell's of the drafts, that they got away from doing that. They chased some needs for a while that I think Schneider regrets.
And kudos to him, because he has nailed these last 2 drafts.
Yeah, he has. He really
I'm not sure about his use of free agent money necessarily, but he's done a really nice job with these last 2 drafts. He hasn't tried to galaxy brain the whole situation, But
what brings my rating down for him, and here we sound like ratings. We don't know the job as well as
of course,
obviously.
Of course.
We're doing this
everyone listening, take this with an entire shaker of salt.
Yeah, it's not Gregg Bell says he could do John Schneider's job.
Right.
It's Gregg Bell wouldn't have drafted D. Eskridge over Creed Humphrey. That's what I'm saying. and that pick alone, set them back for a couple more years on the line of scrimmage and the offensive line. Because if you don't have a center, you're in trouble. Yep. So 9 centers in 9 years is a problem that the general manager has failed to address. That pick alone brings his rating down for me.
Yep. Yeah, I got him as, over the last 5 years, I've got him as like a high 4s, low 5s, like you said, totally middle of the pack. Last 2 years, and look, they've had some more salary flexibility. They've reset, anytime that you go young, it gives you more flexibility in terms of the type of players that you want to get, right? He's turned over the entire locker room, and that's huge because there were some stale voices in there. I think you can speak to it better than me, but it felt stale from a juice standpoint for a few years there. And everyone got to look, I'm not going to relitigate the last couple of years of Russell Wilson's time here, but I think one thing that we can say with close to certainty, again, correct me if I'm wrong, you're closer to it than I am, is the franchise as a whole got to take a deep breath after that trade and figure out, okay, who do we want to be? And I think they've done a pretty good job with what they got in that trade. All right, so last thing before we get out of here, what were your expectations for the Seahawks when the season started, knowing everything that you knew? And how have they changed, if at all, now that we're 12 games in?
I thought they were going to be a 10-win team that would not win the division because they had not closed the gap with San Francisco. That wasn't as good on run defense as they thought they were. That was still too thin at defensive tackle and asking Jaron Reed to do too much. They are not as good on offense as I thought they would be. I thought they would be a better running team, and I thought their offensive line was better at pass protection than it's proven so far to be. And I think that has affected Geno Smith and made him a more turnover-prone quarterback this year. But I thought they were going to be a 5 seed, the high wild card. I didn't expect Philadelphia to run away with the NFC East as it has for most of the year. That would make Dallas a 12-13 win for 5 seed as a wild card. But now Dallas has a chance this weekend to get the division lead. So I thought Seattle was going to be like a Dallas, a second fiddle in the division in a 10-12 win team that could be a high wild card to go beat up on some 3rd or 4th seed in the first round of the playoffs. So they have regressed in that. Well, let's say they've stayed the same because I think they're going to end up 9-8 in the 7th seed, and we're going to be going to Detroit, Philadelphia, or San Francisco in the first round of the playoffs. So they're exactly where they were in January of 2023. And to me, that's damning for all that they've done and all they tried to do and overhaul the defensive front, as I mentioned at the top, with all the contracts and the moves they made to be at the very same place they were last year. And that's because they've kicked these games. They have just flat not executed in some games that could have totally changed the season, the 2 Rams being the most. But they have underperformed for what I thought my expectation would be for them. But it did not surprise me that San Francisco is still that vastly superior to them.
Yeah. Yeah, man. It sucks that Brock Purdy is good, man.
Yeah. When the last pick of the draft is crafted, you're beating you up. That's just
giving them a full pass on the whole Trey Lance situation.
Right. Exactly.
And saving them millions of dollars.
Well, that's it, right? The best the Seahawks have ever been was when Russell Wilson was under his rookie contract.
Of course.
If you have a quarterback that excels, I'm sure you've gone this bridge many times. The 49ers are where Seattle was in 2012, 13, and 14 with a quarterback under a rookie contract. And actually they're paying Purdy millions less than they paid Russell Wilson as a 7th-round pick. And that allows you to go bring in Hargraves and bring in Christian McCaffrey and all that because your quarterback's getting paid peanuts.
Yeah, man, I'm with you. Listen, Greg, this has been one of my favorite conversations that we've ever had on this show.
You say that to everybody. I'll give you that.
Come on now, because here's the thing. This is what we needed. We needed as a show. We needed to tell the truth Monday. Right? Pete Carroll's big on that. And that's what we're getting from you today, which is why we were so excited to have you.
I'm not a fan. I get criticized quite a bit for that, but I have to explain to people.
No, I like that you're not a fan, man.
Well, thank you.
That's one of the best things about your coverage. That's what we need.
Yeah, I have full disclosure. I'm born and raised just 30 minutes outside of Three River Stadium in Pittsburgh. I had terrible towels all over my house. My twin babies were born into terrible towels 20 years ago. So I'm a Steeler guy. My son is going to the Steelers-Seahawks game. I got him tickets way back when for it.
Yeah. Your children, Jerome and TJ.
Yeah, exactly. My daughter's named Jerome. My son's named TJ. Yeah. So, but I do think, Jackson, to your point, I think it does help my coverage, and it at times makes me be a little more critical.
Oh, certainly does. It certainly does. And listen, man, look, I try hard. I fail at this sometimes. I try hard not to criticize how people are fans. Like, look, come to the Seahawks, come to your favorite team as you are, and whatever. I just ask that you try to be accurate. And in the effort to try to be an accurate fan, and as someone who likes to think it can offer a little bit of analysis to this team, it's still important to have some objectivity. Of course, I'm going to root for the Seahawks. My job gets easier. Your job gets easier when they're winning. But my goal is to have an accurate view of this team. And to me, it's so disappointing that they're 6-6, which you told me, hey, you're going to be, if I didn't look at the record or the schedule and see who they have left, just, you don't know who they're playing this year, and they're going to be 6-6 after 12 games. So you take it? I'd say, yeah, I'd probably take it. We're talking about this team like they're 6-8. And that to me is the most disappointing thing, is that they're 6-6, and in our minds they're 6-8. And that's a bummer. So I'm with you. The rosiest view of this team has 9-8 and a 7 seed. I think it's more likely that they're 8-9. And all of a sudden there's a lot of questions. I hope that we as fans, I hope that the team itself looks at this with that initial 3-year view that Mike and I took after the Russell Wilson trade, after the Bobby Wagner release, says this is 3 years to get back. And I do think they're ahead of schedule on that. But again, they had so much momentum through the ultimately 18 games last year and first 7 games this year that said, okay, maybe they're ahead of that schedule. And they just aren't. So if they are 8-9, if they do miss the playoffs, I'll be curious to see if we see some overcorrection by this team instead of holding the course. Like, yeah, I always think the realistic window for this team post Russell Wilson trade was to compete 2024 through 2026.
And holding the course would mean Geno Smith comes back. And it starts there. And that will be a question that they'll have. And that will tell you if they are what you're saying, a 3 or longer term plan. If they're reactive to this season, in this last half of the season, then maybe Geno Smith's future becomes a question. I think he should be back unequivocally. I think he makes them better. I think he needs more help. I think he needed more devotion to, as I mentioned, the offensive line and the run game. But if they decided to start over, which they could, as I said, for relatively low cost after 1 year with Geno Smith's contract, if they start over, then that means they're in win now mode rather than this 3-year window you're talking about.
Totally agree with you, man. Listen, Greg, thank you again for coming in, man.
Welcome, Jack.
We've got so much respect for the work you do. We appreciate you taking the time. That. It's why we were so intentional about getting you on this show. Thanks again, man.
That's really kind. And I love that. I've told you this offline and I tell you it online. I love the work you and Mike do, and you do a great service for Seahawks fans, and they should be happy to have you.
It's extremely kind of you to say, man. Listen, the folks who are listening to this show right now, where can they get more of your stuff?
Thanks. At Gbell Seattle on whatever they call Twitter now. Yep. And thenewstribune.com is our home for news. Just a little side thing that I'm probably not supposed to tell, but I've dropped the paywall on Seahawks coverage the last couple of weeks. You can
Let's go.
Have at it.
Let's go, baby. And also, like, we've been fortunate to have, I think, just about every member of the Seahawks beat on this show. One of the things, and y'all do a great job. I know you guys are close. That's one of the coolest things about it is that y'all hang out and text each other and all of that. But one of the things I really appreciate about you is, not afraid to ask the tough questions and really grateful for your time today. Thanks again.
Thanks, Jackson. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, listeners. Appreciate it.
All right, y'all. That's going to do it for today. As always, you can find Mike and I on social media as well. I am on Twitter at @JacksonBevins. That's JACSON. Remember that no K is okay when spelling my name. Mike is on Twitter at @MikeBarwin, and the show itself is @Cigar Thoughts. You can catch full video episodes on our YouTube channel @Cigar Thoughts and find the rest of our socials at cigarthoughtsnfl.com. Of course, you can listen to this show and read every article at fieldgoals.com/cigarthoughts. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts and you like the show, drop us a 5-star rating and leave a quick review. Finally, be sure to check out cigarthoughtsnfl.com to get your exclusive Cigar Thoughts cigars like the one I'm smoking right now, or hit me up on Twitter and I'll shoot you the details. And when you buy those cigars, reach out, like many of you have, and tell us what you think. Thank you to all of y'all listening for your continued support of the show. We know you've only got so much time for podcasts in your life, and it's been an honor to be a part of that for y'all. Seeing so many of you post us as one of your top podcasts on your Spotify Wraps has been extremely cool. Like, that's just wild to me. And I know that Mike appreciates it as well. Thank you so much for that. Please know that by sharing this show on social media and with your friends, you give us the juice to keep making it happen. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, onwards and upwards, my friends.